On this week's episode, have we got a story for you? In fact, it's one of those that have multiple stories within the story due to all the interesting people, places, and things involved. Our story this week surrounds Edwin Nirmaier, a World War I naval pilot who later had a seaplane charter service business where one of his clients was the notorious mob boss, Al Capone. We'll tell you about the time he surprised Capone by bombing his Miami home over some boxing tickets he was promised. Nirmaier then managed the largest seaplane base in the country, headed up by Glenn Hammond Curtiss, once the fastest man on Earth, father of naval aviation, and contemporary of the Wright Brothers. This endeavor led Nirmaier to be entered into the second annual Miami All-American Air Races, where he won this trophy. All of this and so much more. So come join us today as we explore this exciting and little-known story that touches upon some great aviation and American history, right here on History and Relics. Edwin Nirmaier was born in Cleveland, Ohio on January 11, 1891. He grew up in Cleveland and at the age of 17 enlisted in the Navy as an apprentice seaman. He received his training in Newport, Rhode Island. Young Edwin got his first taste of seawater while stationed aboard the USS Ohio before being transferred to the USS South Carolina in 1910. He became a coxswain and spent time aboard the USS Hartford in Annapolis, Maryland. In the 2 years spent in Annapolis, he witnessed the birth of naval aviation. In 1916, while aboard the USS Texas, Edwin, now a boatswain's mate first class, received an opportunity to receive flight training at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. Edwin was part of the first group of enlisted men selected for flight training in the United States Navy. His 18 months of flight training began on December 8, 1916. Edwin had just finished ground school when the U.S. and Germany entered World War I. He was swept off to France, where he was part of the first American military aeronautical organization. There, he continued his flight training, becoming a flight instructor himself, and along with a few other men, formed the foundation of the first naval air station in France. Edwin trained scores of pilots right up to the end of the war, when the armistice was signed. After the war and back home in the States, he returned to Pensacola as a naval flight instructor before retiring to Fleet Reserve status in July 1922. However, he would later be called to active duty once more upon the breakout of World War II. He would achieve the rank of Chief Air Pilot and officially retire after the end of the Second World War. In between world wars, he led a very successful civilian life. He and business partner Harry Rogers opened the first civilian airmail lines in the U.S. The initial flight took place on July 1, 1922, when Edwin flew from New Orleans to Pilot Town, Louisiana. Within a few years, he left the airmail business and moved to Lake George, New York, but retained ties to Miami, Florida, where he returned in the winter months to operate a seaplane charter service. One of Edwin's most notable clients that used his charter services was none other than Al Capone, the notorious Chicago mob boss and gangster. On February 2, 1929, Edwin flew Capone and a group of his friends and cronies over to the islands of Bimini, which is 50 miles east of Miami and just northwest of the Bahamas, for a picnic that Capone had planned. Edwin charged Capone $150 and was tipped another $100 for a trip to enjoy salami sandwiches and drink beer. But Capone had also promised Edwin a pair of tickets to the heavyweight boxing match between Jack Sharkey and young Stribling, scheduled for February 27, 1929, at the Flamingo Park Arena in Miami Beach. The day before the fight, Edwin still hadn't received the tickets he had been promised from Capone. Well, Edwin had a few fireworks bombs and decided to fly over Capone's house at 93 Palm Avenue in Miami. When he arrived and was overhead of Capone's mansion, he lit the fuse on the bombs and tossed them out of the plane. Needless to say, things went off with quite a bang over top Capone's house, so much so that Capone's henchmen rushed out of the house with their pistols drawn and ready to shoot. But fortunately, they didn't take aim at Edwin. As Nirmaier continued flying over the house, he parachuted down a note to Capone asking where his tickets to the fight were. By the time Edwin got back to the airport and deboarded his plane, Capone's chauffeur had driven up with his tickets. Sharkey later prevailed over Stribling, winning a 10-round decision. A likely reason why Capone didn't retaliate against Edwin is because Capone was involved in a vicious gang war with his rival George Bugs Moran, and on February 14th of 1929, Capone had conspired with his associate Machine Gun McGurn in taking out 7 of Moran's guys who were duped into thinking they were going to a garage to pick up some hijacked liquor on the cheap, when in fact they were set up and killed in what is now referred to as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Meanwhile, Capone retained a clean alibi by picnicking, vacationing, and being at home. The seaplane charter service company that Edwin worked for during his encounter with Capone was the Curtiss Flying Service. Edwin was its operations manager of the Miami to Trinidad division of the airline. The base was the largest seaplane base in the U.S. And the man behind the Curtiss Flying Service was none other than Glenn Hammond Curtiss, an American aviation and motorcycling pioneer and father of naval aviation, who was also the recipient of the very first pilot's license in the U.S. He started out in New York, working for a bicycle shop fixing broken bikes, but later owned his own shop. He was a champion bicycle racer who later came up with his own motorcycle designs and engine developments. On January 24, 1907, Curtiss set an unofficial world record of 136 miles an hour on a 40-horsepower V8 motorcycle of his own design and construction in Ormond Beach, Florida. But that wasn't enough for the fastest man on Earth, as his aspirations took to the skies above. He joined the Aero Experiment Association in 1907, a group started by Alexander Graham Bell, focused on creating heavier-than-air flying machines. By this time, Orville and Wilbur Wright had already become the first in flight, having successfully flown a powered aircraft for 12 seconds on December 17, 1903. The Wright brothers knew that the key to controlled flight was the ability to twist the wings, to which they developed and patented wing warping. But it was Curtiss who invented and applied the use of ailerons to aircraft, which are still the method of control use in modern aircraft today. Curtiss and the Wright brothers had a contentious relationship, resulting in being involved in several lawsuits and legal battles that went on up until the start of World War I, when the government, who was in need of planes, stepped in to stop their fighting. Meanwhile, Curtiss had opened flight schools in California and Florida to teach the first naval pilots how to fly. By 1928, after Glenn Curtiss and Orville Wright were no longer involved with their companies, and Wilbur had died in 1912, they combined to form the Curtiss-Wright Company, which created planes like the P-40 Warhawk. The company is still in existence today. Glenn had been living in the Miami, Florida area since 1920 and had retired from aircraft development and manufacturing, although was still active with the flying schools and the seaplane venture that hired Edwin Nirmaier in 1929. Curtiss was also a large real estate developer by this time, having helped found the cities of Opa-locka, Miami Springs, and Hialeah. He also transferred land to the city of Miami for its municipal airport, known as Glenn Curtiss Field. The airfield would later be where Amelia Earhart took off on her second and ill-fated attempt to circumnavigate the world in 1937, and for whom the airfield would later be renamed in her honor in 1947. One of his real estate partners during this time was James Bright, to whom Glenn met in 1916, and together they formed the Curtiss-Wright Company. The pair spotted a near-perfect location to develop in what is now the intersection of Highway 70 and County Road 721. That spot was dubbed Brighton in honor of his co-founder, James Bright. It was here that the Palm Circle Inn opened on March 24, 1926, but by 1928 was rebranded the Brighton Valley Hotel, an 83-room luxury hotel with a rustic theme that would host such guests as Charles Lindbergh and President Herbert Hoover. The early 20th century and the golden age of aviation were good to Miami, Florida, as there were airlines, barnstormers, and racers galore. One particular race, the Miami All-American, was held annually from 1929 through 1935 before becoming rebranded as the All-American Air Maneuvers, which continued on through 1950. Air racing was a showcase for new designs and equipment, and a major attraction for a fascinated public. Different classes raced, including women-only events, parachute competitions, and huge flypasts that would open the gala, which later included dirigibles, such as the USS Akron. Because of his love of aviation and previously establishing the Curtiss Marine Trophy for the Curtiss Marine Trophy Seaplane Race in 1911 to encourage the development of seaplanes and flying boats, which was later popularized by the U.S. Navy, Glenn Curtiss continued to interject his aviation support by having the Brighton Valley Hotel as a trophy sponsor during the 1930 Miami All-American Air Races, which took place January 13th through the 15th of 1930 at Miami Municipal Airport, or Glenn Curtiss Field. In one of the contests at the 1930 Miami All-American Air Races, Edwin Nirmaier won this trophy, presented by the Brighton Valley Hotel. The specific contest Edwin entered is not known, nor is it known what plane he flew, but based on his expertise and history of flight up until this point, it's no surprise that he took top prize at this early air race. Just a few months later, on July 23, 1930, Glenn Curtiss died unexpectedly from complications after a surgery for appendicitis. In 1931, Edwin moved on and became the pilot for Powell Crosley, who was a successful radio and automobile manufacturer, once dubbed the Henry Ford of radio. He even took part in helping to build the Crosley Flying Flea, a simple aircraft that Crosley envisioned that amateurs could build and even teach themselves to fly. Edwin Nirmaier and two other men built the airplane in November 1935. After several flights, a crash at the Miami Air Races in December 1935 grounded the Flea for good. However, it has since been restored and can be seen at the Smithsonian. Edwin remained employed with Crosley until called up once more for active military service for World War II. He later retired as a chief air pilot for the U.S. Navy. Edwin died in August 1978 at the age of 87. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our program. If you like our content, we ask that you give us a thumbs up, a like, share with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you always know when our new content is published. And all of this costs nothing, but means a lot to us and keeps us growing. You may also leave us a tip if you choose. The address is provided here on your screen, and a link is provided in the description area below. So until next time, everyone, this one is history.